Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa van Dijk, and in today's video I want to explain why the sodium-potassium balance can be so hard to understand, but at the same time very easy to change. Now, Mariam Tariq left a comment under one of my recent videos asking how we would even know if this balance is off internally. And the tricky part is that you usually do not know just by feeling it. The body regulates these things very tightly, so it is not always obvious from one symptom. And in a normal food environment, this imbalance would be much harder to create, because most foods, as they naturally come, are relatively low in sodium and much richer in potassium. But in the modern food environment, we change that. And that is exactly the problem. Sodium is not only in the obvious salty foods, but it hides in the normal foods we now build meals around, like bread, cheese, sauces, restaurant meals, street foods, packaged foods, and all the little salty additions that come with them. And at the same time, many of the foods that naturally bring potassium back into the diet get feared because they are seen as too high in carbs or too calorie dense. So we almost have it backwards, because the foods that could help bring the balance back start looking suspicious, while the foods that quietly push sodium higher become completely normal. So sodium is showing up again and again throughout the day, while potassium-rich whole foods may only show up once in a while. And this is where modern food becomes such a serious issue. I mean, when you sprinkle salt on your food, at least you can see it, so it's not really a big deal. But the real issue is the sodium that is already built into the food environment before you even touch the salt shaker. So in that sense, sodium almost works like a modern background drug. Modern food delivers it constantly, quietly, and from so many different places at the same time. And just to give you a rough idea, many health guidelines place the daily sodium target somewhere around 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams. And that sounds like a lot if you're not familiar with these numbers. But once you start looking at normal meals, you can see how easily it is to go above that without even trying. And honestly, I would not be surprised if many of you watching this are easily above these numbers on a normal day, simply because of the food environment we live in. And that is why I want to show you this visually. I chose eating patterns that are common in my audience, but also common in the modern food environment in general. Because once you see it in real meals, it becomes much easier to understand. So let's start with a typical Western breakfast. A bagel with cream cheese, some eggs, bacon or sausage, or even a breakfast sandwich on the side. And here you can already see the issue. The hidden sodium is coming from several places at once. It is in the bread, the cheese, the processed meat, and often in the way the meal is prepared. So you can already start the day sodium heavy before lunch even happened. In this example, it can already be around or even above the recommended daily amount. And that is why it is so sneaky, because we often imagine sodium heavy eating as something very obvious, like eating salty snacks all day. But that is usually not how it looks. A normal breakfast can already create the sodium heavy pattern quietly, before the day has even really started. And this is where the pattern matters more than one single food, because breakfast is usually followed by another normal modern meal built in the same kind of food environment. Then lunch happens. Maybe it is a daily sandwich with some chips, pickles, or a salad with bottle dressing on the side. Again, this looks like a completely normal lunch. But when you look at how the meal is built, the sodium is not coming from one obvious thing. It is spread across the whole setup. The bread is already part of the sodium background, which you may not even have on your radar. The daily meat is usually preserved and salted. The cheese adds more. Then there may be pickles, chips, dressings, or sauce on the side. So the meal does not even need to taste extremely salty for the sodium to add up. You're basically eating a normal modern convenience meal where sodium has quietly been added into almost every part of it. And this is not only an American or Western thing. This is a modern food environment issue around the world. In the next example, I have Indian food, and the issue here is not the cuisine itself. Because if the meal is homemade and built around things like dal, lentils, vegetables, potatoes, greens, coconut, fruit, and real whole foods, the pattern can actually be very potassium rich. The problem starts when that meal shifts into a modern version. And once it depends more on restaurant preparation, salty sides, pickles, packaged snacks, instant noodles, biscuits, bread and sauces, the sodium background starts taking over. So the same cuisine can have a completely different effect depending on how the meal is built. One version is still mostly whole foods with potassium built in. The other version flips the ratio and turns it into a sodium-heavy meal. Because then the balance of the meal changes. It is no longer mainly real whole food with a lot of potassium built in. It becomes a meal where sodium is coming from the restaurant-style preparation, the salty sides, the packaged snacks, the sauces, and the processed additions around it. And those are two very different food environments. So you essentially take a meal that could naturally be very potassium rich, and then you turn it into a sodium heavy version of the same meal. You flip the ratio. And that is where the problem starts, because it no longer behaves like food as it comes. And the same thing can happen in Southeast Asia, where I'm currently traveling. This is actually one of the places where I became even more aware of this, because you can see both sides so clearly. You can see the fresh ingredients, the herbs, the vegetables, the rice, the fruit, the soups, so the real food. But the sodium background can still be very high when the flavor is built mostly through salty sauces, dipping sauces, curry pastes, instant noodles, street food seasoning, fried snacks, and restaurant preparation. So the meal may look much fresher, but it can still have the same problem. And this is why the visual appearance of food can be so misleading in our modern food environment. A meal can look healthy, fresh, normal, or traditional, but the sodium background can still be very different from food as it comes in nature. And this is where the natural food environment matters. In nature, potassium comes built into whole foods, like roots, tubers, fruits, vegetables, greens, beans, lentils, coconut water. These foods already bring a lot of potassium with them. You do not have to add potassium to them. It is already there. But sodium is different. Sodium is much more limited unless you add salt. Eat naturally salty foods, live near the ocean, eat a lot of seafood or seaweed, or lose a lot through sweat. So the natural pattern is that potassium is built into the food and sodium is much more limited. But modern food flips that. Modern food makes sodium constant and potassium-rich whole foods become something you have to intentionally bring back. That is the imbalance. And this is why acne breakout trigger foods can get so confusing. Because you may eat mango, dried fruit, whole grain bread, dairy, chocolate, ice cream, or something else. And then you think that that one food caused the breakout. But in the pressure model, where pores are pressure release points, the food is not always the root problem. It may simply be landing on top of a body that is already sitting in a sodium-heavy food pattern. So the trigger food, whether it is sodium-heavy or potassium-heavy, can reveal the state your body was already in. And that is why the same food can be fine in one situation and can cause a reaction in another. And this is the easiest way to understand it. You would usually not create this imbalance by eating food as it comes. Because in a real food environment, potassium comes built into the food, and sodium is much more limited. But in the modern food environment, sodium is built into almost everything. So now the imbalance becomes like normal, because the food environment itself has changed. And unless you intentionally bring potassium-rich whole foods back into your meals, you can become sodium heavy without even realizing it. That is why trigger foods can be so confusing. They do not always create the problem. They reveal the imbalance underneath. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!